EWTN presents Building Bridges, San Francisco. I'm your host, Mark Mosini, and I'm also joined here by my co-host, our very own Jerry Davis. Jerry, welcome.
Thanks. Good to be here, Mark.
Great. Here on Building Bridges, we discuss issues that are important to people today, not only here in the USA, but around the globe. Our aim is to promote peace, unity, love, brotherhood, because we're all human beings that deserve respect and equal treatment. Tonight we have another great and very exciting show, and we are pleased and honored to have with us Dr. Burton L. Visotzky. And I do apologize, Doctor, if I'm saying your name incorrectly here, so please correct me here. I want to give a brief bio for Dr. Visotzky so that our listeners can be more familiar with him. He serves as Appleman Professor of Midrash and Interreligious Studies at the Jewish Theological Seminary, where he joined the faculty upon his ordination in 1977. Dr. Visotzky is the Louis Stein Director of the Finkelstein Institute for Religious and Social Studies of JTS, charged with programs on public policy. He also serves as director of the Milstein Center for Interreligious Dialogue of JTS. Dr. Visotzky was associate and acting dean of the Graduate School and founding rabbi of the Egalitarian Worship Services at JTS's Women's League Seminary Synagogue. Dr. Visotzky holds degrees from the University of Illinois at Chicago and Harvard University and JTS. He has been visiting faculty at Oxford, Cambridge, and Princeton universities, and at the Russian State University of the Humanities in Moscow. He also served as the Master Visiting Professor of Jewish Studies at the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. So that's a little bit of an introduction, Doctor. And also, for our viewers, Dr. Visotzky has published many different books, some of which are, I'll just name a couple here, such as The Genesis of Ethics. Another one is The Road to Redemption, Lessons from Exodus, and I can go on and on here, but I think that'll do it. And I want to ask Dr. Visotzky if you want to add anything to this introduction.
No, not at all. Thank you. It's always somewhat daunting to hear a 40-year resume recounted in a minute or two. It sounds like I've actually accomplished something.
Yeah, we have more, but with the limited time, we wanted to get to your views. So you have quite a history. It's very, very impressive.
And we certainly, again, appreciate that you're on this show. So let me go ahead and just ask a question here right away. Before I get into your actual work at the Hartford Seminary School, I'm going to ask a few questions that I think is important to our viewers globally. The first one being, what are your thoughts about the events that are going on in the Middle East, especially with events in Syria now, and what the media has kind of termed as the Arab Spring?
I think that the events throughout the Middle East, and particularly in the Arab countries, but there's also been demonstrations in Israel as well. All of these are evidence of the fact that human beings want a say in their affairs, and that they will push hard to be recognized, to be heard, to be respected. And this is true whether the person who needs to respect them is their government or some other government or someone they perceive to be the enemy. There's a very, very strong urge in every human being just to be recognized and to have respect. And as we learn in the Bible, humans are created in God's image. So the ability to recognize that in every human being, is, I think, what generates and powers this what's so-called uprising.
very good outlook. That's I think that you hit that right on the head because God is within every one of us. So I think we all deserve that respect.
I wanted to follow up on that, Doctor, with regards to what you mentioned about spirituality and the events that are taking place. So do you believe that maybe it's also time in terms of biblical prophecy that these changes are happening? Are we living in a time period that's important from that perspective?
I'm not an apocalypticist. I think that human destiny is very much in human hands, and I'm not looking for a deus ex machina where God comes down from heaven or some divine savior comes to bring us to the end time. I think we live in the here and now, and that's very much a Jewish perspective. We live in the here and now. We do our best to control our destinies, whether it's speaking to or for our governments or speaking to one another. And I don't imagine any kind of intervention or end time. We're right now.
Okay, and I ask that question with all due respect, because as in the Torah there are verses about the coming of, well, maybe not in this time, or it's according to interpretation, but the coming of a Moshiach, the King Moshiach, and some might interpret these events in that regard. So that's why I was asking that question.
Yes, just if I might, a slight academic correction. Those verses are found in the latter part of the Bible, not actually in the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, but in the prophets and in the writings. And yes, there certainly is, even in modern Judaism, there are groups that are messianists. I'm just not among them.
Yeah, okay. We have groups, and I think the U.S. is one of the bigger part where these groups are. That pertain to, they look at the end of times, they look at an apocalypse as though it's the end of everything, and I think that's a pretty big misconception myself.
Thanks, Jerry. I want to also ask you, Doctor, do you think that the United States has a major role to play in this new paradigm shift there?
I think that the U.S. is going to be a major player no matter what, because we are a very large country with a large population. We're a country that has perhaps the largest military on the face of the earth. We have interests across the globe, and we're not about to abandon those interests at any time soon. Whether these are military interests, democratic interests, that is to say in promoting democracy, whether these are business interests, we live in a global world now. And so the U.S. Of necessity has interests, whether it's in the Middle East or the Far East or right here at home.
Very interesting. Do you think that interest has been compromised because of the changes of the regimes in the Middle East? And do you think that the role for the U.S. has become smaller? Certainly there's a policy shift, but do you see the U.S. having a major impact as before? For example, I mean, the regime in Egypt that has fallen. Of course, Mubarak was, he was aligned with the Western interests, but that's no longer so the case now with a new government taking place there.
I think it's a complicated dance, and I actually admire President Obama in kind of realigning with realities around the globe, which is to say we cannot, as a country, simply dictate unilaterally that our interests will be met. We have to work with other countries. Just as I opened a few minutes ago saying individuals want respect, surely countries want respect, governments want respect, and I think the Obama administration has gone a long way towards building alliances rather than working unilaterally. Of course, all governments want stability, and one of the things the Arab Spring has brought is a great deal of instability. So we have to be watchful, we have to be careful, we have to keep a hand out to all the different factions. It's just a whole lot more complicated now. But I think going forward, particularly with the notion that we will go forward in alliances and larger alliances and groups, we will be able to achieve stability once again. But it's going to be a long haul.
Mm-hmm. Do you also think that, what are your thoughts about the things that have happened here in the U.S., especially with the Occupy movements that were happening around the country? Do you feel that those are some indications of America's own sort of spring, or do you feel those movements are dead now?
I think as long as there is an enormous gulf between the rich and the poor, as there is in this country, and as there is, in fact, in many developing countries, Israel being another good example, and Israel having its own demonstrations for very similar issues, I think as long as that kind of gulf exists, then people will necessarily speak their voice and talk about the unfairness that is inherent in that kind of a disparity.
Yeah, we see that going on everywhere. That's in the UK and Norway and Israel and Spain, and I think that's a worldwide issue at the moment.
Yeah, it seems so that way, Jerry. I agree. It seems like it's a global phenomenon, not just isolated to the Middle East. It seems like it's happening in Greece and in Europe. Probably, this economic crisis is, of course, adding to that effect. But that brings me to Israel, because you mentioned that, Doctor. How are things in Israel, and how are things going between the people and the government there?
Well, Israel is a very complicated place, and frankly, the government itself changes almost daily, because right now Netanyahu is presiding over I think the largest coalition government they've ever had in the history of Israel. Whether that coalition will stay together, whether the deal he struck to make the coalition will hold, because he seems to be perhaps tinkering with the offer he made to get in one of the parties, remains to be seen. Just in today's news, Mofaz was saying that if Netanyahu is not able to make good on his promises to draft the ultra-Orthodox, then the coalition will fall apart. Coalition governments are always fragile, and sometimes are held hostage to the most extreme elements in that government. And Israel certainly has, for decades now, been very, very in debt to the votes of the ultra-right-wing Orthodox parties, who are not at all shy about using their clout to get what they want.